I heard it with my own ears. Why is she even still alive? The voice wasn't loud, but sharp enough to slice through the soft June evening in Portland, Maine. A dry laugh followed, brittle as seashells breaking in the wind. I stood behind the wooden gate of my son's backyard, holding a tray of warm blueberry cobbler, something I'd baked all afternoon, hoping to share with the family. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just stood there, hollow in a way that frightened me. I could have turned around, gone back to my small apartment on the west side of the city, poured myself some tea, and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. But instead, I pushed open the gate and stepped in, quietly, as if I still belonged there. The backyard glowed under strings of golden lights draped through the maple trees. The smell of barbecue, pop music, children's laughter echoing across damp grass. A perfect party, except for the feeling that I was walking into a place that no longer had a seat for me. Harper, my daughter-in-law, was laughing among her friends. She wore a white dress and the pearl necklace I'd given her for their anniversary last year. The light hit it, cold and brilliant. When I came closer, she looked up with that same bright smile. "Oh, you made it! We didn't know you were coming." I nodded. "I brought cobbler." No one reached out to take it. I placed the tray on the buffet table and sat in a folding chair at the very end of the row. No one asked me anything. No one turned around. Daniel, my son, raised his beer. "To family," he said. The group cheered, glasses clinking. I smiled too, but no one noticed. The grandkids ran circles around the yard. Not one of them stopped by. Lily, the oldest, 16, walked past, her face lit blue by her phone. Maybe they just didn't recognize me without the little gifts or snacks I used to sneak in my pockets. I looked at Harper, at Daniel, at the way they chatted and laughed, as if I were some passerby who'd wandered into their yard. The sea breeze carried the scent of smoke and salt. I pulled my cardigan tighter, but inside, the cold was worse than anything Portland's wind could bring. I stayed until the party began to fade. No one told me to stay. No one told me to go. I gathered a few plates, folded napkins, wiped the damp table. Harper glanced over. "You don't have to do that, Mom." "I know," I said quietly. When they took things inside, I remained. The yellow lights trembled in the wind. The cobbler tray was almost empty, still warm, but it no longer tasted sweet. I stood, slowly walked to the gate. No anger, no sorrow. Just a decision forming like a steady tide. I've stayed in this place long enough. The next morning, I made myself a small cup of black coffee. I sat by the window, the same one where Daniel used to do his homework. I could still see that little boy hunched over, legs swinging, asking silly math questions. Now that boy had his own house, his wife, his world, one that no longer included me. I didn't speak to anyone that day, just fetched the mail and stacked the envelopes on the table without opening them. On the electric bill, I noticed the name, Daniel Whitmore, right where mine used to be. That house had begun with me. I still remembered the day I transferred $40,000 from my retirement account to help him buy it. "Don't worry, Mom," Daniel said. "This will be our family home." And I believed him. No contracts, no conditions, just trust. But last night, standing in that backyard, I realized, in that family home, I was the only one without a seat. I went into my small study, opened the old metal drawer. The folder labeled Daniel House was right there, dust lining the edges. Inside, the mortgage papers, wire receipts, and a handwritten note I once slipped in. "Because you are my son, and I believe in you." Reading those words again hurt. Not because of the money, but because of the faith I'd placed in them. Faith that kindness would be remembered. But sometimes people forget the very water they've drunk. That night I called Evelyn Park, an old friend who used to work in the probate office at the Cumberland courthouse. "Evelyn," I said slowly, "I need to ask you a few things. About family papers." She paused for a few seconds, then replied gently, "Bring everything tomorrow. I'll make tea." Just that, and yet I felt something ease inside me. Maybe because for the first time in years, someone was ready to listen, not judge, not avoid. I hung up and sat there, watching the house fade into soft yellow light. On the shelf sat Frank's photo, my late husband. The wooden frame was worn smooth. We'd taken that picture in 1983 at Higgins Beach. The wind had been strong, my hair wild. Frank laughed and said, "You look like you own the wind." I smiled at the memory, and then it faded. Yes, there was a time I thought I could own everything. Now I just wanted one small thing back: the right to exist in my own life. The next morning, Portland was wrapped in a thin layer of fog, like breath against glass. I put on my thick coat, tucked the file neatly into a canvas bag, and drove toward Evelyn Park's house. The old car started slow, a little like me, someone still learning how to leave an old habit behind, the habit of endurance. Evelyn lived at the end of a quiet road off Congress Street, a small 2-story cream-colored house with a wooden sign on the porch that read, "Welcome, old friend." The door opened before I could knock. Evelyn, silver hair tied low, glasses on, greeted me with that kind of smile no one else seems to manage, honest, unforced. "Come in, Eleanor," she said, holding a steaming cup. "Chamomile, as always." I nodded. "Thank you. I brought everything." I set the thick file on her wooden table. The cover smelled faintly of old paper and time. We sat by the window. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, falling across the file. Evelyn opened each paper carefully, reading in silence. After a few minutes, she looked up, voice calm. "No co-ownership clause. No trust. No written condition. Your son holds full title. This wasn't a loan or an investment, Eleanor. It was a gift." I pressed my lips together. I know. I just needed to see it with my eyes, not my memories. Evelyn rested a hand on the folder. "This happens often. People think love alone can protect them. But you know, trust without a signature is fragile." I gave a small, tired smile. I used to think love didn't need contracts. "Oh, it does," she said gently. "We just call them by softer names." She pulled out a clean sheet of paper and wrote across the top, "Personal Power Checklist." "I make this for every older friend," she said. "A small list, but it helps you see what power you still hold." I watched her write, each line deliberate. 1. Revoke or update power of attorney, POA. 2. Update will. Remove anyone no longer trustworthy. 3. Review all bank accounts and access permissions. 4. Check co-owners on insurance and retirement plans. 5. Establish a trust if you want to protect your final wishes. She slid the paper toward me. Start from the top. No rush. But don't wait too long. When you're ready, I'll help. I held the paper. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like I was holding a part of myself I'd let others keep for too long. We sat in silence for a while. The clock ticked slowly on the table. Outside, last winter's snow still clung to the garden in uneven patches. Evelyn poured more tea. You don't need revenge, Eleanor. Sometimes just putting things back in order is enough. I nodded. I don't want revenge. I just want to stop disappearing. She smiled. Then you've already started in the right place. By the time I left her house, the sun had broken through. The wind off the bay carried the scent of salt and cold water through my hair. I pulled over by the harbor, watching a small fishing boat carve a white line through the gray-blue sea. And I wondered, do people only realize the value of solid ground after drifting too long at sea? That afternoon, I went home. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, warming the wooden table. I took Evelyn's checklist and pinned it to the refrigerator. Under the title, I wrote a new line. Start date, today. Then I pulled out the old folders I'd ignored for years, savings books, insurance papers, bank cards, and began sorting them into piles. I crossed out names that no longer belonged, added notes in the margins, slow, careful strokes, like mending torn fabric. Around 5 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His name on the screen made my chest tighten. I didn't answer. A minute later, a text came in. Harper said you seemed sad on Sunday. I don't want any misunderstanding. We're still good, right, Mom? I read it over and over, still good. Those 2 words had been my answer to everything. When I lost my job, when Frank passed, when Daniel borrowed money and never paid it back. I used to think good meant peace. Now I know it was just an empty shell, a way to hide the truth no one dared to name. I deleted the message, didn't reply. That evening, I baked an apple pie. Not for anyone else, just because I liked the smell of cinnamon filling the kitchen. When it was done, I sat by the window, cut a small slice, and ate slowly. The crust cracked softly between my teeth, the only sound in the house besides the ticking clock. I looked around, the photos, the things Frank once fixed, the embroidered tablecloth Lily made years ago. All of it warm, all of it proof that things can be kept, but not always cherished. I picked up the checklist and marked the first line. 1. Revoke power of attorney. A single check mark, but I knew it was the first cut, the start of untying the invisible knots that had held me for years. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in decades. On the first page I wrote, not everyone is born knowing how to protect themselves. Some only learn after they've lost almost everything. I closed the book, set the pen on the nightstand. The lamp's soft light touched Frank's photo. I whispered, as if he could still hear me. Tomorrow, I'm taking back my power of attorney. Not to fight anyone, but to remember I still have the right to live as myself. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees, a whisper that sounded almost like approval. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I just felt awake. That night, I didn't sleep deeply. Each time I opened my eyes, the soft yellow light from the kitchen reflected off the paper on my fridge. Power checklist. Evelyn's handwriting still stood clear, even in the dark. I closed my eyes again, but sleep wouldn't come. Something inside me was shifting, not anger, but awareness. A quiet, steady kind of awakening after years of letting others decide who I could be. By morning, a light drizzle covered Portland. Rain fell softly, not loud enough to interrupt, just enough to make you sit still and think. I stood by the window holding a mug of black coffee, watching the water trace long lines down the glass. Today, I would finish step 2 of Evelyn's list. Update my will. Revoke every existing power of attorney. When I arrived at Evelyn's office, the sky was still a pale gray. The old brick building sat snug between 2 weathered storefronts, its windows glowing with warm light. Evelyn opened the door before I could knock. Her smile, the same as always, calm, knowing, kind without needing words. "You're here," she said, setting a cup of tea on the desk. "Sit. I've got the papers ready." I nodded and sat across from her. On the table was a new stack of files, cream covers, crisp edges, the scent of fresh ink still faint in the air. She slid one toward me. "This is the revocation of power of attorney, and this one's your updated will. If you're ready, we can do both today." The title stared up at me. Revocation of power of attorney. Just one page, but it carried the weight of decades of silence. I signed it. My hand trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from release. Each stroke of ink felt like cutting through the invisible ropes that had kept me bound. When Evelyn stamped the notary seal, she looked up with a small smile. "There, it's done. From now on, no one can act on your behalf again, except you." I smiled back. "It feels strange, Evelyn. Lighter than I expected." "That's what starting over feels like," she said softly. "I've met so many people like you. They think it's too late, but too late only means no one dares to wait any longer." And she pulled out another file, my old will. Daniel's name stood out in bold at the top. Primary heir. Evelyn looked up. "Do you want to keep it that way?" I sat quietly. Outside, the rain whispered against the window. "No," I said finally. "Keeping it means keeping the pain, too." She nodded and wrote a few quick notes. "All right, we'll shift your assets to individual ownership. You can also appoint a neutral trustee if you prefer." "No need," I said. "I just want everything back where it belongs, where it started, where it should have stayed." Evelyn smiled softly. "Not many people can say that so calmly, Eleanor. Do you realize how brave that is?" "It doesn't feel brave," I said. It felt harder pretending everything was fine. By the time I left, the rain had stopped. Sunlight slipped through the clouds, thin and silver like silk. I stopped by a small flower shop on the corner and picked a bouquet of white tulips. Frank used to love them, said they were simple, honest, like the way I lived. Back home, I placed the flowers on the dining table beside the power checklist. Then I marked another check beside the second line. Update will, complete. 2 tiny marks, but to me they felt like 2 new breaths. I exhaled deeply. The house was quiet, no laughter, no footsteps, but peace lingered where noise used to live. That afternoon, the phone rang. Harper, I hesitated, then picked up. "Hi, Mom," her voice sweet, but thin, like sugar dissolving in water. "Daniel said you met with a lawyer. Is everything okay? Did someone upset you?" "No," I said calmly. "No one upset me. I'm just organizing my papers." "You don't need to do that," she said quickly. "We can take care of those things for you." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Harper." But taking care of me and deciding for me are 2 different things. I just want to keep my part. Her tone shifted, still gentle, but sharper now. "I think you're making this harder than it needs to be. Daniel's only trying to help. You know he loves you." "Love doesn't mean ownership," I said softly. "Real love, Harper, is letting someone choose their own path, even if it's not convenient for you." Silence. Then finally, she said, "I'll talk to Daniel," and hung up. That night, I didn't feel sad, just hollow in a peaceful way, like space newly cleared. I took the checklist off the fridge and laid it on the table. The first 3 lines were done. Only 2 remained. Review bank accounts, create a trust. I looked at them for a long moment. Tomorrow, I'd go to the bank. I wanted to do it while I was still clear-headed, still strong enough to sign for myself. The next morning, I walked into First Mutual Bank, where I'd once opened a joint account with Daniel. The branch manager, a young woman named Trina, smiled politely. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I'd like to review the access on my account," I said. She typed a few keys, then looked at her screen. "It shows you have one cosigner, Daniel Whitmore, correct?" I nodded. "I want to remove that authorization. The account should be under my name only." Trina blinked, then nodded with quiet respect. "Of course. I'll just need you to verify your ID and sign a few forms." As she printed the documents, I looked toward the little pothos plant on the windowsill. Its leaves drooped slightly, but still shone green, thriving even in low light. I saw myself in it, patient, quiet, but still alive. "You'll need to sign here," Trina said, handing me a pen. I signed, firm and clear. "All set," she said with a warm smile. "From now on, only you have access to this account." I thanked her and stepped out into the sunlight. The pavement gleamed, wet and bright, like the city itself had just been rinsed clean. Back home, I checked off another box. Review bank accounts, complete. 3 small check marks, but together they felt like a declaration. These weren't just documents, they were evidence, proof that I was reclaiming myself. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window. The wind from the bay carried the smell of salt and pine. Quietly, I spoke, as if Frank were still somewhere near. "You know, I'm learning how to live again, not for anyone else, but for me." And in that moment, I realized you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes, taking back your life one quiet step at a time is loud enough for the world to notice. I don't know what made that morning feel different from all the others. Maybe it was the sunlight, maybe the silence, or maybe it was the way I looked at myself in the mirror. A 72-year-old woman with silver hair, but eyes that were finally clear again. I poured my coffee and stood by the window. The smell of salt from the bay drifted in, mingling with the faint sweetness of last night's apple pie. 3 small check marks still gleamed on the power checklist taped to the fridge. Quiet but powerful. Each time I looked at them, I could almost hear Evelyn's voice in my head. "You don't need revenge, Eleanor. Just put things back in order." Order. I smiled. Maybe I'd lived too long in the kind of chaos people like to call fine. That afternoon, Daniel showed up. No call, no warning. Just a quick, impatient knock. The same rhythm he used when he was a little boy. When I opened the door, he stood there, hands in his pockets, face uncertain, anger flickering behind his eyes. "Mom," he said. "Harper told me you're doing something with the paperwork." I nodded. "Yes, I'm just reorganizing things." "What does that mean?" "It means I revoked the power of attorney and updated my will." Daniel frowned. "You don't trust me? After all these years?" I looked at him for a long moment. "It's not about trust, son. It's about learning that trust and surrender aren't the same thing." He fell quiet, his shoulders lowering slightly. "Harper's been crying," he said finally. "She thinks you hate her." I sighed. If she feels guilty, then maybe she knows why. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the house, glancing around like he was looking for proof of something. His eyes landed on the paper stuck to the fridge. Power checklist. "What's this, Mom?" A reminder that I still have a say in my own life. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "A say for what? You don't need to prove anything." "No," I said evenly. "I don't. I just want to remember that I still exist." The room went still. For a moment, his eyes softened. Then, as if someone tugged invisible reins inside him, he turned toward the door. "I just don't want you doing something you'll regret." The door closed halfway before I answered quietly. "The only thing I regret, Daniel, is teaching you that I never say no." That night, I sat in my small study. On the desk lay an old folder marked Daniel House. I opened it. Receipts, transfers, photos of the unfinished property. Each page felt like a thin slice of the past, where I'd traded too much of myself for the illusion of being needed. I reached for the scissors and cut the paper that read Joint Account Authorization. The sound was small but final. The paper fell to the floor, but what I'd really cut loose was an invisible cord that had bound me for years. Around 8 that evening, the phone rang, a number I didn't know. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," a calm female voice said. "This is Aisha Patel from Keenan Associates. Ms. Park referred you? I understand you're interested in setting up a personal trust." I blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, though I'm not sure where to start." "That's perfectly fine," she said warmly. "A trust helps protect your assets and lets you set clear conditions for who benefits. You can even require that beneficiaries live by the values you believe in, not just share your bloodline." Her words made my heart quicken. "Values clause," I repeated softly. "You sound just like my husband once did." Aisha chuckled. "Then I imagine Frank would be proud. Shall we meet tomorrow to go over the details?" "Tomorrow," I said. 10 a.m. After the call, I leaned back in my chair. The house was still, the rain tapping gently against the eaves. I picked up a small notepad and added a new line beneath the checklist. 6. Meet Aisha Patel. Establish personal trust. I stared at the words for a long while. Maybe this was how healing looked for someone like me, through paperwork, through law, through order. The next morning, I met Aisha at a small cafe on Congress Street. She was younger than I expected, early 40s, petite, with bright eyes and a steady voice. She opened her laptop and said, "Who would you like as your beneficiary?" I smiled faintly. I'm not sure yet. Maybe not Daniel, at least not for now. "That's all right," she said. "We can keep it open. What matters most is defining your conditions, what you believe makes a person family." I looked out the window. A fine drizzle shimmered on the pavement. "The condition," I murmured, "maybe gratitude, no exploitation, and a willingness to help someone weaker than themselves." Aisha nodded. "Sounds like something every good mother hopes for." I smiled back, a real one this time. I used to be a good mother. Now I just want to be a fair woman. Our meeting lasted over an hour. When I signed the final page, Aisha said gently, "From this moment, your assets are protected under trust law. No one, not even family, can touch them without your consent." I smiled. Feels like the final layer of armor. "Not armor," she said softly. "Respect." The word stopped me cold because I realized how long it had been since anyone used it in my presence. That afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds. Back home, I placed the new folder in my metal cabinet and labeled it Trust, Eleanor Whitmore. Then I took out my pen and checked the last box on the list. 5. Create personal trust. Complete. I stood there, staring at the 5 tiny check marks. No fireworks, no audience, but I knew I'd crossed halfway through the journey. That evening, a message from Daniel lit up my phone. "Mom, I'm sorry for raising my voice yesterday. I just don't want to lose you." I looked at the screen. Didn't answer right away. I thought of what Evelyn, Aisha, and Frank would have said. Then I typed, "You won't lose me, Daniel. You're just learning to see me as a whole person." I hit send and set the phone down. The house fell into a gentle quiet. Outside, sunset light spilled through the window, painting the room in soft gold. For the first time in years, I no longer felt bound by those invisible strings. I just felt light, as if the Portland breeze itself were whispering, "You finally cut them, didn't you?" Monday in Portland felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because of the strange quiet in my house. The wall clock ticked slowly, like it was counting down to something I couldn't yet name. I poured coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked out the window. Outside, dark red maple leaves spun in the wind before settling on the damp grass. The scene made me think of Evelyn and what she'd said. When you start to change, the world around you will shake a little. Don't be afraid. It means you're living right. I'm not superstitious, but that morning, I knew something was about to happen. The phone rang at 9:30. Evelyn. Her voice was steady with a hint of urgency. Eleanor, I just got a notice from probate. Your POA revocation has been flagged for review. I froze. Review? By whom? By Daniel, she said. He filed an objection claiming you're showing signs of diminished capacity and emotional influence. They're pausing your POA until a competency hearing. I went quiet. I wasn't shocked, just sad. Stay calm, Evelyn continued. I've already requested your medical capacity letter from Dr. Keene. It will show you're fully competent. I nodded, knowing she couldn't see me. Thank you, Evelyn. I guess my son doesn't know who his mother is anymore. No, she said gently. He's afraid of losing control. People panic when the mother they think is fragile starts standing strong. At noon, I went to the post office to send certified copies. When I came home, a silver SUV was idling at the curb. Harper stepped out, long coat, hair perfectly set, as if she were headed to an event, not to visit her mother-in-law. Mom, she said, half warm, half cutting. I heard you're having trouble with paperwork. I opened the door, calm. No trouble, just procedure. She walked in, eyes sweeping the room like an inspector. Daniel's worried, you know. He only wants to protect you. I gave a small, dry smile. Protection or control, Harper? Easy to confuse the two. Her hand tightened around her purse. The softness dropped from her eyes. I'm just being honest. Has it crossed your mind that someone might be using you? Evelyn, maybe, or these new lawyers? I met her gaze. Harper, I've lived long enough to tell the difference between real care and staged concern. She inhaled, then shifted tones, sweeter. I just don't want you getting taken advantage of. The house, the assets, those should stay in the family, for Lily, for the kids. I don't disagree about the grandchildren, I said, but the family you're talking about, does it include respect? Silence. Only the soft hum of the fridge filled the room. Then a thin smile cut across her face. You really have changed. Daniel's right. You're not the same. That's true, I said. The woman I used to be stayed quiet for too long. She turned, heels tapping a steady challenge across the wood floor. At the door, she paused, voice turning cold. I hope you know what you're doing before everything slips out of your hands. Thank you, Harper, I said softly. I hope you learn that too. ... That evening, an email from Evelyn. Subject: Hearing date confirmed. Body: Your capacity hearing is set for next Friday at the Cumberland County Courthouse. I'll be there with you. Get ready, Eleanor. I read it 3 times. I'm not afraid of courtrooms. I've sat through harder seasons. Frank's passing, Daniel trying to sell our first home. But this felt different. This time, I wasn't just defending assets. I was defending my right to be seen as sound of mind. 3 days later, Friday morning, I wore a gray coat and the blue scarf Frank gave me years ago. Evelyn picked me up in her small sedan. On the way, soft jazz played. Don't worry, she said. It's just procedure. I'll be right beside you. I watched the bare trees slide past the window. The world outside gray as an old film. Evelyn, I asked, can people love their children so much they can't feel their own wounds? She thought a moment. Yes, but the beautiful thing is you're healing yours, not with medicine, but with truth. She said, "The Cumberland courthouse is small, yellowed walls, dim light. In the waiting area, Daniel arrived with his attorney. His eyes brushed mine and then slipped away. Harper sat with arms folded, face closed. A young woman approached, introducing herself as Carla Mendoza from the court's capacity unit. Her voice was kind and professional. Mrs. Whitmore, today we just need to confirm that you understand the documents you signed and can make your own financial decisions. Nothing to worry about." "I understand," I said. "Thank you." The interview lasted nearly an hour. I answered every question clearly and calmly. When they asked why I revoked the POA, I said, "Because my son is an adult, and so am I. I no longer need someone to decide for me." Carla nodded. She asked, "And regarding your will, did you change your primary beneficiary?" "I didn't cut anyone out," I said. "I added conditions, gratitude and respect. If that's a fault, then I apologize for becoming clear-headed." No one replied. Only Evelyn looked at me, eyes bright with pride. When it was over, Carla shook my hand. "You're more competent than most people I see." "Congratulations. Your POA revocation will be reinstated today." "Thank you, Carla," I said. "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not a file." Daniel stood near the door, silent. As I passed, he murmured, "I don't understand you anymore." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "That's all right, Daniel. You don't have to understand me. Just remember, I'm still your mother. I'm just not someone you get to define." That afternoon, Evelyn drove me home. Sea air swept in through the cracked window. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Light," I said, like I just unlatched a door that had been stuck for years. "And what's behind the door?" "Freedom," I whispered. "Not freedom to leave, freedom to stay without feeling burdened." She smiled and turned to the window. Portland glittered in the late light, the bay shining like a mirror. That evening I sat again at the kitchen table, looking at the power checklist. All 5 boxes were checked. I wrote one last line beneath them. 6. Keep my clarity every day. Then I slid the paper into a drawer. I didn't need it on the fridge anymore. I'd memorized it. Before bed, a text from Evelyn. "Freedom is never free, Eleanor. But you just paid your share." I read it twice, then smiled. Outside, the bay kept its steady rhythm as if all of Portland was humming to me. "You did it." After the hearing, I thought I could finally exhale. But silent battles don't end that easily. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived from First Mutual Bank, sealed carefully, with a note clipped to the front. "Please contact us to confirm recent changes to your account and safe deposit box." The word safe deposit box made my heart sink. That was where Frank and I had kept everything that mattered: birth certificates, wills, and a small gold key to his investment account. I hadn't opened it since Frank died. Daniel, with his old POA, had access back then, and now I couldn't stop wondering. What had he taken while I wasn't looking? The next morning, I drove to the bank. Trina, the branch manager I'd met before, greeted me with her usual warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. We were just about to call you." "I got your letter," I said. "Is there a problem with my lockbox?" She hesitated for a moment before replying. "Not exactly a problem, but there's been recent access. And the person—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "My son." She nodded. "Yes, before the POA was revoked. But now that your records are updating, we'll need to verify the contents to prevent disputes." I nodded, though I felt a sharp ache beneath my ribs. "Can we open it now?" The vault was deep and cold beneath the bank's main floor, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. Trina handed me the small silver key tagged number 118. When the metal turned in the lock, the click sounded sharp, like a memory unsealing itself. Inside were only a few envelopes. I laid them on the table, one by one. A copy of Daniel's birth certificate, a faded photo of Frank and me at Higgins Beach, and one thick envelope, sealed and labeled in Frank's handwriting. Investment account, Tech Core Systems. I opened it. Inside were stock statements, about $358,000, split across 3 small accounts. Tucked beneath them was a handwritten note from Frank. Eleanor, if anything ever happens to me, don't let anyone pressure you to sell. This is your freedom, not a decision for anyone else to make. I froze. That word, freedom, echoed in my mind like the wind off the Portland Bay. Trina stepped back into the room. Would you like us to make certified copies of these? Yes, please, I said, and I'd like the lockbox access changed to my name only. She nodded, printing the forms. Done. From now on, only you can open this box. I held the key in my palm. The cold metal pressed against my skin. Solid. Real. For the first time in years, I held the key to my own life. On the way home, I stopped at the old cafe on Congress Street. It smelled the same. Roasted beans, aged wood, quiet jazz. Evelyn was already there, laptop open. You found something, didn't you? She asked. I laid the envelope on the table. More than I expected. Tech Core Systems stock. Frank left it for me. Daniel might have known. Evelyn nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. If he accessed or tried to reassign the account, there'll be a trail. Can you check? Of course. A moment later, she looked up. 3 months ago, someone logged in from Round Rock, Texas, where Daniel was traveling. The shares weren't sold, but the user profile was temporarily edited. I sighed. So he didn't cash out. He was preparing to. Maybe, she said. But now everything's back in your hands. That afternoon, I went home and opened the steel cabinet. I slipped the new folder inside, labeled it Assets, Frank's Legacy. Then beneath that I wrote, No one may sign under any name except Eleanor Whitmore. When I folded the paper shut, a lightness spread through me. Like closing a door I'd forgotten I had the power to lock. That evening, while washing dishes, my phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. Mom, I know you went to the bank. I don't understand why. I never meant to hurt you. I sat down, reading it twice, and I believed part of it. Daniel wasn't cruel, just weak. He'd let Harper's influence and convenience take the place of gratitude. I typed back slowly. I know. But love isn't a reason to let someone else hold the keys to my life. Then I set the phone aside. The next morning, I met with Aisha Patel. She greeted me with peppermint tea and that calm, steady smile. You look tired, she said gently. Just thoughtful, I replied. Frank used to say peace doesn't arrive on its own. You earn it by standing up for yourself. I think I finally understand what he meant. Aisha nodded. He was right. And you've come a long way. She slid a file toward me. This is the Trust Activation Agreement. We'll attach the TechCore stock to your personal trust. From now on, it's legally protected and non-contestable. I signed, steady, deliberate. It felt like rewriting the ending of our marriage, this time without tears. Outside, the sun bounced off the bay, glinting on the glass buildings downtown. I paused on the sidewalk, looking out at the light. If Frank were here, he'd probably just smile and say, You did good, Ellie. You finally kept what I meant for you to have. I smiled back, quietly. Not proud, just at peace. That night, I opened my bedside drawer. The bank key lay there, shining faintly under the lamp. I wrapped it with a soft blue ribbon and placed it beside our wedding photo in a small wooden box. Before closing the lid, I whispered, This time, Frank, I'm not locking it to hide. I'm locking it to protect. Outside, Portland shimmered with evening light, reflections rippling across the bay like 1,000 small promises. I took a sip of tea and glanced at my reflection in the window. Not the woman who once stayed quiet, but someone who had learned to hold the keys again. To her home, her bank, and her life. And I knew this journey wasn't over. But from now on, every lock would open by my hand. A week had passed since I locked the deposit box and moved Frank's stocks into the trust. Every morning I still brewed coffee and stood by the window overlooking Portland Bay. The wind carried salt, gull cries, and something harder to name. A sound that felt like peace, but with a pulse of waiting underneath. I knew the battle wasn't over. Not with banks, not with lawyers, but with memory itself. Every form I signed today was built on years of blind trust I once called love. One morning, Evelyn stopped by. She placed a thick file on the kitchen table. "Eleanor, do you remember the first time you transferred money to Daniel?" 2003, I said. His first house in Falmouth. Frank was still alive. Evelyn nodded. "Right. I found that record, and a few things you'll want to see." She opened the folder. Inside were old bank statements, home renovation contracts, and faded photographs. Frank, Daniel, and me, smiling in front of that house when the paint was still fresh. On one bank slip, I saw my signature next to the line, "Family support, $40,000. I smiled sadly. I called it a gift back then, but really, it was the price I paid for a seat at the table. Evelyn stayed quiet, then pointed to the bottom of the form. "See this? Subject to family equity. Harper added that clause when Daniel refinanced the deed in 2012. I froze. She added it without asking me? No permission. And that clause means your $40,000 was classified as a non-refundable contribution. I sat still. It felt like someone squeezing my heart, gently, but enough to hurt. 20 years and I'd never thought to read that line again. "Evelyn," I said quietly, "I thought helping my child was good. But I guess kindness without a receipt isn't kindness. It's a transaction waiting to be rewritten." "And that," she replied softly, "is why we need receipts for respect." That afternoon, I sat on the porch with the file. The wind was sharp, but the sunlight poured across the pages, making them look alive again. I read through every date, every note. 2003, transfer. 2012, deed refinance. 2024, the mother erased from her own equity. 20 years, a long enough circle for love to turn into obligation, and obligation into silence. I opened my laptop and began scanning everything. Evelyn was right. Truth has structure, and structure needed storage. I created a new folder, Legacy Audit, 2003 to 2024. Each file renamed, numbered, annotated. When I reached the photo of Frank and me holding the house keys, I paused. I had no idea then that I was handing over so much more than metal. That evening, Lily called. Her voice was small, trembling. "Grandma, Mom said you're suing Dad. Is that true?" "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm not suing anyone. I'm just reclaiming what's mine." She was quiet, then whispered, "Mom says someone's influencing you. But I don't believe her. You always do things on your own." I smiled. "You remember that?" "Of course," she said. "You told me once, when someone tries to silence your voice, speak with your actions." Her words warmed me from the inside. "Then you'll understand, Lily. That's exactly what I'm doing." The next morning, my phone rang. Aisha Patel. "Mrs. Whitmore, we finalized your asset consolidation," she said. "But there's one thing. Do you want to include the evidence of unauthorized deed filing from 2012 in the trust? It'll protect you from any future family claims." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "All of it. No gaps this time. Good, Aisha replied. I'll send you the digital scans. But keep printed copies too. Sometimes, holding the truth reminds you of its weight. That afternoon, I stopped at a tiny print shop on Cumberland Street. The copier hummed softly as each page emerged, black ink forming clean lines, neat rows, the story of my life in paper and toner. The young clerk smiled as he handed me the stack. Writing a memoir, ma'am? Not exactly, I said, just cleaning house. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting on the porch. The Portland air was cool, the street lamps casting a pale halo around him. We need to talk, he said. I opened the door. He stepped inside. The file from Aisha lay open on the kitchen table. He saw it immediately. You're still not done, are you? No, I said evenly, because I stopped too many times before. He exhaled sharply. Why dig up all this? You want to humiliate me? I looked him straight in the eye. No, Daniel. I want you to see the truth. And truth isn't shameful. It's just inconvenient to remember. He clenched his fists. You're tearing this family apart. I rose from my chair, resting my hand on the file. This family broke the day they treated me like an investment. I'm just collecting what I put in. He stared at me, wounded. I never thought you could be this cold. Cold doesn't mean heartless, I said softly. Sometimes, cold is how we survive. He turned away, his face caught somewhere between anger and sorrow. Behind that, I could still glimpse the little boy who once clung to my hand on this first day of school. But I couldn't save that child by staying silent anymore. When Daniel left, I watched him disappear into the soft yellow light outside. On the table, the papers sat neatly in their folder. I gathered them up, placed them in the steel cabinet, and turned the key. The click echoed, small, final, and deep in my chest. It was the sound of 20 years finally closing. I stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the salt air. The wind off the bay stung my face, but it felt clean. From somewhere far away came a sound of waves. Frank once told me, truth is like a house. The more you clean it, the brighter it gets. And now, after 20 long years, I finally understood. I smiled softly into the dark. The house is getting brighter, Frank, I whispered, one room at a time. And I knew, just a few more steps, and I'd finally walk out of the shadows, for good. After Daniel left that night, the house sank back into silence, thick as fog. But this time, it didn't feel lonely. It wasn't the kind of silence that meant forgotten. It was the kind that let me finally hear myself. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, the one I'd started keeping as a kind of therapy, and wrote 4 words on the first page. Silence has volume, because not every truth needs to be shouted. Sometimes all it takes is stopping and letting others feel the sound of your stillness. 3 days later, Harper appeared. No call, no warning, just 2 sharp knocks on the door. I recognized that rhythm, not concern, but control slipping through her hands. She walked in, phone still in hand, lips pressed tight. Eleanor, we need to talk, she said, half command, half concern. I'm listening. Daniel hasn't eaten in days, she snapped, setting her bag down. He says you've ruined everything. The bank called. They told him he no longer has access. That's right, I said softly, because it's my account. Harper laughed, short, brittle. Unbelievable. You spent your whole life for your son, and this is how it ends? I met her gaze, calm. I spent my whole life for my son, Harper. Now I'm spending it with myself. That's the difference. She stood still, then stepped closer. You know, if people hear about this, they'll think you've lost your mind. Maybe, I said evenly, but at least I haven't lost myself. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time her voice softened. Real. Almost human. Daniel needs you. He doesn't know how to be left behind. I exhaled. No one's abandoning him, Harper. I'm just done being the floor he refuses to stand on. When she left, the air felt lighter. I knew women like Harper feared one thing more than losing control. Losing the ability to manipulate through guilt, and now that power was gone. I went to the drawer, pulled out the documents Aisha had mailed earlier, and placed them neatly in a folder. On the front page, in black marker, I wrote, "Every real change begins in silence." That afternoon, I visited B. Nolan, my old neighbor at the end of the street, the one who used to play chess with Frank. She opened the door, eyes lighting up. "Good heavens, Ellie! I thought you'd vanished." "Just learning how to be alone," I smiled, without being lonely. We sat on her porch, sipping mint tea. Bea leaned back, her voice calm and knowing. "I heard about the trouble with your son. Are you all right?" "I am," I said honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel like I have a voice." Bea nodded, smiling faintly. "Some people spend their whole lives learning not to apologize for existing, Ellie." That line stayed with me all afternoon. Bea's hands trembled as she lifted her cup, but her words didn't. When I got home, a message waited from Lily. "Grandma, Mom and Dad were fighting. She said it's all your fault. I don't get it, but I just want you to know I don't think that." I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." Sometimes adults say things they don't yet understand. Just remember, your silence has power too. Use it when you need peace. She replied with the little heart emoji. That small message warmed me more than any apology could. That night, Portland drizzle tapped softly on the windows. I wrote in my journal, "Silence isn't weakness. It's how the wounded learn to hear their own heartbeat again." Then I closed the book and looked around the kitchen. No TV noise, no arguing, no one trying to talk over me. Just the sound of rain and the faint scent of cinnamon in the air. Quiet, but not empty. The next morning, Aisha called. "Eleanor, the audit's complete. You should come see this in person." I met her at her small, bright office downtown. She handed me a blue folder, the full 20-year record of Daniel's property transactions. "Look here," she said, pointing to a line. "In 2018, the house was refinanced. Harper signed as joint authority, not you. That means you no longer hold any legal tie to the property, even though the initial capital came from you." I closed my eyes briefly. I figured as much. At least now I know for sure. Aisha tilted her head. "What will you do?" "Nothing," I said. "I don't need the house. I just need the record, proof that justice was written down." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll draft a historical claim addendum. It won't return the asset, but it documents your contribution. Sometimes, leaving history on paper is its own kind of justice." That afternoon, I drove home along the coastal road. The sky had cleared. The water sparkled against the rocks, steady and forgiving. I rolled down the window, breathing in the salt air. "We did it, Frank," I whispered. "No more signatures of mine under someone else's name." The wind lifted yellow leaves from the roadside, carrying them off like pieces of the past I no longer needed to keep. That night, when I pulled into the driveway, something waited under the doormat. A folded note. Daniel's handwriting. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I'm angry because I feel small next to the woman you've become. I thought I was losing you, but maybe I'm just losing the right to see you as weak." I read it again and again, tears slipping down, not from sorrow, but from release. Because for the first time, my silence had been heard. I lit a small candle and placed it beside Frank's photo. Its glow flickered softly against the glass. "You see, Frank?" I whispered. My silence finally made a sound, loud enough to reach even the hearts that once turned away. I sat there, watching the flame tremble, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. Because now I knew, when a woman learns to be silent for the right reasons, the whole world eventually listens. 3 days after Daniel's letter, Portland turned cold fast. That morning, fog was so thick, I couldn't even see the trees across the street. I poured my coffee, ready to write a few lines in my journal, when I heard 3 soft, steady knocks. I opened the door. Lily stood there. Her heavy coat nearly swallowed her small frame, her eyes red and swollen. "Grandma," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." I pulled her inside and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "What happened, sweetheart?" She sat down, hands trembling around the cup of tea I handed her. "Mom and Dad have been fighting all week. Mom says Dad ruined everything. Dad says Mom made him do it. I just can't take it anymore." I sat across from her, quiet for a long moment. In the soft morning light, her eyes looked exactly like Daniel's when he was little, defiant and scared at the same time. "You can stay here as long as you want," I said. "This house always has a place for you." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I just want somewhere peaceful," she said. "I'm tired of all the yelling." I understood. Those sounds didn't just shatter the air. They cracked something inside a child's faith. I stroked her hair gently. "You don't have to pick sides, Lily. Just pick peace." She leaned her head on my shoulder and sighed. "I knew you'd say that." All morning she slept on the couch. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching her face. Peaceful for once amid the storm. I sat beside her, notebook in hand, but didn't write. I just watched her breathe, remembering Daniel at 10, hiding under the kitchen table whenever Frank and I argued. Children don't forget. They just learn to endure quietly until they grow up, and repeat what once broke them. At noon, my phone rang. "Harper." I almost didn't answer, but Lily stirred and whispered, "You should, Grandma." She won't stop. I picked up. Harper's voice was hoarse, edged with panic. "Eleanor, is Lily with you?" "Yes, she's safe. Daniel's been looking everywhere for her. He's falling apart. Mr. Keene says you could use this to pressure him in court." I closed my eyes. "I'm not playing that game, Harper. I'm protecting the only person you both seem to have forgotten." There was silence on the line. Then Harper spoke, softer now. "You don't understand. Daniel's losing everything, his job, the house. He blames you." "I didn't push my son to the edge," I said calmly. "I just stopped cushioning the fall so he could see where he stood." That evening, Lily woke up to the smell of soup. "Did Mom call?" I asked. "No," she said quietly. "She knows I'm here, but she won't come. Mom hates being wrong." I ladled her a bowl and smiled. "Then eat. Here, you don't have to be right or wrong. You just have to eat and breathe." She gave a shaky laugh. "I like it here. It's so quiet, like the house knows how to listen." I looked out the window. Rain began to fall again, soft and uneven. "Sometimes," I said, "silence is how a house heals the people inside it." Later that night, the phone rang again. Daniel. I hesitated before answering. "Mom," his voice cracked, "is Lily with you?" "Yes, she's safe. I need to talk to her." I handed the phone to Lily. Her voice was small but steady. "Dad, I'm not mad at you. I just need a break. I'm more afraid of the yelling than the dark." There was a long silence. Then Daniel asked, quietly, "Did Grandma tell you to say that?" "No," I said, taking the phone back. "That's her own voice, Daniel." the voice of a child who's been stuck between two adults who refuse to be quiet. He choked out the words. "Mom, I don't know how to start over." "Start by listening," I said softly. "Sometimes the truest apology isn't spoken. It's staying quiet long enough for someone to believe you've changed."
After the call, Lily curled up under her blanket. "Grandma, can Dad really change?" I smoothed her hair. "Yes, if he's brave enough to look at himself. And if not, you'll still be okay, because you've already seen what others can't." "What's that?" "That love isn't about holding someone up. It's about letting them learn to stand." She smiled, her eyes closing slowly. I listened to the rain outside, remembering the night Daniel was born. Frank sitting by the window holding him, whispering, "Silence means you're truly alive." The next morning, a text came from Harper. "I'm sorry for what I said before." I panicked. "If it's all right, I'd like to pick Lily up this afternoon." I replied, "Let her decide." When Lily woke, I handed her the phone. She read the message quietly, then said, "I think I'll go home. Not because I'm scared of Mom, but because I want them to see I can walk back on my own." I smiled, proud. "You've grown more than anyone in that house, Lily." When Harper arrived, she looked different, smaller somehow, no arrogance, no defiance. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what else to say." "Sometimes saying nothing is enough," I replied. "Silence can be an apology, if it comes with change." She nodded and took Lily's hand. Before leaving, Lily turned and hugged me tightly. "Grandma, I'll write you every week." "Just live honestly, sweetheart," I said. "That's enough." When the door closed, the house fell quiet again. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through. It fell across Frank's photo, and the reflection danced in the tea's surface. "You see, Frank?" I whispered. "Today our son began to listen. And our granddaughter? She learned that silence doesn't mean fear." I smiled. Because sometimes justice in a family doesn't come from courts or inheritance. It comes from the moment a child dares to say, "I just want peace." Lily's silence had its own sound, and it echoed further than any accusation ever could. 2 weeks after Lily went home, Portland sank into the season's first snow. Flakes fell without a sound, laying a white path across my front steps. I thought things had calmed up, until one morning Evelyn knocked. She carried a thick file. Her eyes were grave. "Eleanor," she said, "you should sit down for this." I set my tea aside. A chill ran through me. "I'm guessing this isn't good news?" Evelyn opened her bag and slid out several printouts. "Harper just filed a civil appeal. She's accusing you of asset abuse and causing financial harm to a dependent. Worse, she attached a forged document with your signature." I stared. "My signature?" "Forged," she said, "but convincing enough to fool anyone who doesn't check." My hand tightened on the table's edge. "So she's really going all the way." Evelyn nodded. "But you have the receipts. And I think it's time you stopped playing defense." That afternoon, I met with Aisha Patel at her office. She scanned the filings and exhaled. "Harper's bold, but this time you're ahead. All your legal paperwork is verified, and your trust is a separate asset." "What should I do?" I asked. Aisha looked up. "Confront her. Not with anger, with transparency." I went quiet, turning her words over. Frank used to say, "You only win when you've got nothing left to hide." Maybe it was time to let the light into every corner. 3 days later, the court held a short hearing. Harper arrived with her own attorney. Camel coat, hair pulled back, cool face trying to look composed. When I entered, our eyes met. No contempt this time, only challenge. Judge Thomas Keene, who'd known Frank back when he worked at the bank, looked at me with a mix of sternness and something like pity. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything to present?" I opened my bag and lifted a thick binder. "Your Honor, I have original certified documents, including bank records, trust papers, and my power of attorney revocation. I also have a forensic signature report proving the specimen attached to Ms. Harper Quinn's filing is a forgery." The judge nodded. "Submit to the clerk, please." As I handed the binder over, Harper's eyes flicked down and wavered. Her lawyer whispered something that made her jaw clench. I stood tall and continued. I didn't want anyone in this courtroom. "But I've lost too much believing silence equals peace. I'm not speaking today to win. I'm speaking to end the practice of using a woman's trust as a tool." The room went still. Daniel sat in the back row. His eyes had been down the whole time, but when I finished, he looked up and for the first time didn't look away. Judge Keene called a brief recess. Harper leaned toward her attorney, murmured, then stepped into the corridor. I followed. Cold light washed the marble. Harper stood against the wall, her hands slightly shaking. "Why do you have to do this?" she snapped. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just not letting you keep doing it." "You don't understand," she said, voice cracking. "I've lost everything. Daniel's out of a job. The house is underwater. I have nothing." I looked at her a long moment. "You still have one thing," I said. "A conscience, if you're willing to tell the truth." She gave a bitter laugh. "Truth doesn't pay the bills." "Lies charge interest," I said quietly. She went silent, then, almost confessing, "You don't know how weak Daniel can be. If I don't hold it all together, he falls apart. I did what I had to do to keep this family." "You held it," I said, "by tying it down. That isn't love." She turned her face away, but I saw her shoulders tremble. Anger or shame, either way, a sign someone was losing control of the story. That afternoon, the court ruled Harper's claim dismissed. She was fined for submitting false documents. Daniel said nothing. He stood and left first. I felt no joy, no victory, only the tiredness that follows a long storm. Evelyn walked beside me. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I am," I said. "Maybe for the first time, I really am." That night, I sat in my chair and looked at the stack of files on the table. Outside, snow fell and caught the streetlight. I opened my phone and reread Lily's old message. "Grandma, I think your silence made everyone listen." I smiled to myself. Maybe she was right. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's a person, standing still in the wind and saying, "Enough." 2 days later, Daniel came. No text, no call. I heard the car, then the door. He looked thinner, hair uncombed, eyes worn. "Mom," he said. "I came to apologize." I said nothing. He drew a breath. "I let someone use my name to do wrong. Worse, I let you carry the weight for both of us." I pointed to a chair. "Sit." We sat across from each other. The clock ticked between us. "I didn't know you were this strong," he said quietly. "I thought you only knew how to endure." I smiled a little. "No one starts strong, Daniel. I just learned to stand up whenever people expected me to fall." His head bowed. Tears hit his hands. "I want to fix this. I don't know how, but I want to try." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "Begin by living honestly. The rest time will handle." When he left, I stepped onto the porch and watched the car disappear into the snow. The air was cold, but I felt warm. For the first time in years, my son had told the truth, not just to me. That night, I sorted the paperwork one last time. I placed everything in a box and labeled it, Closed, Case Whitmore. I slid it into the cabinet beside our wedding photo. "Frank," I whispered, "our son came back today. Not to make excuses, but to relearn how to be a man." Outside, the snow stopped. A clear slice of sky appeared. Moonlight skimmed the bay like a scar that had healed. I shut the window, poured more tea, and sat by the candle's glow. No more courtrooms, no more arguments, no more filings or accusations. Just me, the house, and the quiet I claimed with courage. And in that quiet, I knew this much. No one can take my voice again, because I've already spoken, with truth, with action, and with the life I've chosen. After the hearing, I started packing, not because I had to leave, but because I wanted to. The house on Munjoy Hill had held me too long inside other people's memories. A wife's, a mother's, a dependent's. Now I only wanted to be myself again. Eleanor Whitmore, 72, still capable of choosing peace. I began with the attic. Between dust and the ocean wind, I found Frank's old wooden box. Inside, a roll of Super 8 film, a few letters, and his silver pocket watch, tarnished with age. On the back was an engraving. "Time doesn't heal, it reveals." I smiled. Frank always spoke in riddles, but this time he was right. Time doesn't erase pain. It just peels away the layers until you see who caused it, and what remains after. I sorted everything into 3 piles: keep, give, and let go. The more I organized, the lighter I felt. Not just because there was less to carry, but because each object, once placed, brought one memory back into order. Frank's coat, I kept. The tea set Harper gave me in 2015, I gave away. Daniel's letter from when he was 12. "I promise I'll never make you cry again." I pressed it between the pages of my journal. Evelyn came by to help. She looked around the house. "This place has a soul," she said. "I know," I replied, "but a soul shouldn't stay trapped at one address forever." We stood quietly for a while before she asked, "Where will you go?" "I'm not sure," I said. "Maybe Bar Harbor. An old friend has a house by the bay. She says it's sitting empty." Evelyn nodded. "You'll like it there. The wind's softer, and the sea's the color of forgiveness." That night, I called Lily. "Grandma, are you moving?" she asked. "Yes, but don't worry. I'm not leaving, just turning the page. Can I help?" "You already have, sweetheart, by living truthfully." She paused, then said softly, "Mom and Dad still fight, but not as loud. Dad doesn't yell anymore. Mom doesn't lock the door. I think they're learning how to talk again." I smiled. Sometimes people don't need to win, Lily. They just need to understand who they've hurt. The next morning, I took a carload of donations to the community center. A young woman behind the counter looked at the boxes. "Are you sure you want to give all this away? Some of it looks brand new." I nodded. If it just sits on a shelf, that means I'm keeping parts of myself I no longer need. She smiled. "It's rare to hear someone give so easily." "Because I'm not giving to lose," I said. "I'm giving to remember that I once had enough to share." When I got home, I stood on the porch and looked at the house. The blue paint had faded, but sunlight still poured through the windows, illuminating the wooden chair where Frank and I once watched the sea. Children laughed in the distance. For the first time, it didn't sound sad. I took out my phone and sent Daniel a message. "Son, I'm leaving Portland soon. Not to run away, but to make room for what's next. If you'd like to see me, I'll be at the old cafe on Congress Street tonight." Daniel came. He sat across from me, glancing around. "I remember this place," he said quietly. "Dad used to bring me here for waffles." I nodded. Your father always chose places with sunlight. He said, breakfast in the sun makes it harder to lie. Daniel gave a sad smile. I wish I'd learned that sooner. No one learns before they stumble, I said gently. Just remember, honest people aren't afraid to be seen. His eyes grew red. Mom, I'm scared you'll leave for good. I'm not leaving, I said softly. I'm going toward my real life. You stay and live yours. He nodded, head lowered. I'll try. And thank you for not hating me. A mother can't hate her child, Daniel, but she can love from a distance, if that distance helps him understand closeness. That last night, I walked through every room. Everything was in order, neat, as if the house itself knew it was time to let me go. I touched the wall and whispered, "Thank you for sheltering me through every storm. Now I'll let new light come in." I turned off the lights, sealed the key in an envelope labeled "For the Next Owner," and stepped outside. Snow drifted down softly. I pulled my suitcase across the small walkway toward the car, then stopped to look back at the sea. I knew Frank would have liked the way I was leaving. No tears, no turning back, just steady footsteps and the quiet scent of freedom. On the drive to Bar Harbor, I turned on the radio. A song came on, the same one Frank used to hum on Sunday mornings. I laughed. You never could stay quiet, could you? As the car crossed Four River Bridge, it felt like stepping fully into a new chapter. No house, no files, no one left to prove anything to. Just me, lighter, clearer, whole. I arrived at the small bay house by late afternoon. The owner, Judith, greeted me with a warm hug. "Eleanor, I've heard about you. They say you're strong." "Not strong," I smiled. "Just patient with the truth." She chuckled. "Then you'll fit right in here. The tides never lie." That first night at Bar Harbor, I sat by the window, watching the black sea stretch endlessly. Moonlight shimmered over the water like an old mirror, reflecting both past and present. I opened my journal and wrote the first line of my new chapter. Only when we stop trying to hold others in place do we finally see where we belong. Then I set down the pen and whispered, "This isn't an ending, Frank. It's rebirth." And in the quiet of that new coastal night, I heard what I'd forgotten for years, the sound of my own heartbeat, steady, sure, and free. Winter in Bar Harbor was cold, but never lonely. Each morning began in mist, the gray sea blending into the pale sky. The smell of salt and the crash of waves against the cliffs became the rhythm of a new life. One where I was no longer anyone's idea of who I should be, just myself. I started my quiet days walking along the bay. Across the water, gulls swooped low, picking at broken shells. Maybe they, too, were gathering pieces of themselves after every storm. I bought a few plants, lavender, mint, and a small daisy, and placed them by the window. Slowly, the house began to smell like me again. Not too strong, just enough to make the mornings gentle. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Lily's handwriting, slanted, uneven, but full of heart. "Grandma, at school we're learning to write a biography about someone we admire. I wrote about you. The teacher asked me to add more details, but I just said, my grandma taught me that silence isn't fear. It's how you hear the truth. I miss you. When spring comes, I want to visit Bar Harbor. I'll bring my camera. I want to take a picture of you smiling." I read it over and over, my throat tightening. A child who once feared the dark was now learning to use light. That was the greatest gift I could ever receive. Weeks later, Daniel called. His voice was steadier, lower, quieter. "Mom, I started a new job, restoring old houses. The pay's not much, but I feel peaceful." I smiled. "That's good, Daniel. Any work that keeps you close to the ground is honest work." He paused.
I know you went through a lot because of me. I don't expect you to forget, just don't carry it anymore." "I don't," I said softly. "I only keep the parts that made me stronger." He chuckled faintly. "Lily's counting the days till she visits you." "Thank you for giving her the safety I couldn't." "No one loses their chance, son," I said. "This time, you just started from the right place." By March, the snow melted. The earth softened and little green shoots poked up from the soil in my garden. I planted a small sign, hand-painted in white, "Garden of Second Chances." Every morning I brewed tea, carried a chair to the porch, and wrote a few lines in my notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "I don't live to seek revenge. I live to prove that courage has no age." My neighbor, Mr. Thomas, a kind widower, often stopped by with warm muffins. One day he asked, "Aren't you ever lonely living by yourself?" I smiled. "No, I've spent years surrounded by people and still felt lonely. Now I have myself, and that's enough." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think the sea likes people like you, those who don't need to be heard to listen." In May, Lily arrived. Taller now, her hair tied neatly, eyes bright. "Grandma, I brought my camera," she said, "but I don't want to take pictures yet. I want to watch the ocean with you first." We sat on the sand. The wind was cool, the waves rolling one over another. "Are you happy, Grandma?" she asked. I smiled, eyes on the horizon. Yes, because I don't need happiness to feel peace. Is there a difference? Yes, happiness is when you get what you want. Peace is when you stop needing to. Lily grinned. "I get it. You're like the sea, beautiful just the way you are." I laughed. "The sea gets angry, you know." "Only to clean itself up," she said, giggling. Her laughter filled every empty space in my heart. That evening, we had dinner with Judith and a few neighbors. They asked what I used to do. I was a wife, a mother, a guarantor, a name erased from the papers. Then, the woman who signed her name again. Now I'm just a storyteller. The table went quiet for a moment. Then Judith lifted her glass. "To the women who learned to sign their names again." Everyone clinked glasses, smiling warmly. For the first time, I felt I truly belonged. Not because anyone accepted me, but because I had accepted myself. That night, after Lily went to bed, I sat by the window listening to the sea and the wind weaving together. I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of my story that began in Portland. I used to think justice meant making others see their wrongs. But real justice is living on without needing their apology. I closed the notebook and looked out at the bay. The sky was clear, the moon high, its light glimmering across the water. A boat moved slowly toward the horizon, disappearing without a sound. Not every ending needs goodbye. Some chapters close with a breath and a single step forward. In the morning, Lily found me brewing tea. "Grandma, what were you writing last night?" "A story," I smiled. "About a woman who lost everything, then discovered the most valuable thing she had was herself." She leaned on the counter, grinning. "I think a lot of people would want to hear that story." "Maybe," I said, setting a cup of tea in front of her. "But what matters is that they feel it." Outside, sunlight poured over the bay. A chapter closed, not with a gavel strike, but with my granddaughter's laughter. And in that moment, I understood. I still have a reason to live, not to be forgiven, but to keep telling. Because to tell is to prove you survived, and every time I speak, I light a small candle for every woman still walking out of her own darkness. If you've stayed with me until this very moment, maybe you've lived through a winter like mine, a season when no one heard you, and silence was all you had left. But remember, silence isn't weakness. It's the heart preparing to speak its truth.
I don't tell my story for pity, but to remind you, no one is ever too old to begin again, and no one is too broken to find themselves. If this story made you think of your mother, your grandmother, or even the woman you once were, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from, because sometimes just knowing we're not alone is reason enough to keep going. So please like, subscribe, and share this story. Remind someone that there's always a reason to live, a tomorrow to love, and a voice, even a quiet one, that can still move the world. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, and this is the story of how I found peace after everything I thought I'd lost.